The following tutorial is intended to assist with students who are working through the Build a Blazor to-do list app tutorial, but wish to use Visual Studio instead of the command line options that are described inside the tutorial. Now, with all of these tutorials, you need to make sure that you have the .NET Core 3.1 SDK installed and all of those additional components. Now, also, because now we're going to do this with Visual Studio, make sure that you have Visual Studio 2019 or later installed and ready to go. Now this tutorial is going to be exactly the same as the previous one, but instead of using the command line, I'm going to use Visual Studio to complete the tasks. So I have the command prompt from a previous tutorial. We don't need it at all. So I'm going to stop it and close it. It's completely unnecessary. So now, this tutorial starts off with saying that it wants you to create a new Blazor app and it wants you to call it To-Do List. Well, in this case, I'm going to call it To-Do List VS so that we have a little bit of a distinction between our old one and our new one. So first I'm going to start by opening Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project. And now I'm going to choose Blazor app. If you don't see it right away, you can type Blazor right here. You can search, we'll bring it to the top. We'll press next. Now, I want to put it inside my directory right here. So I'm going to copy my path and paste it there. And what do I want to call it? Well, right now I already have to-do list. So let's call this to-do list VS for Visual Studio. And then I'll press create. Now, if I go back to the instructions, it's asking the command to create Blazor server. Well, Blazor server, that's what we're going to choose and create. So now that in this next section, it's asking you to switch to the directory and then add a Razor component. Well, we could do that using the interface inside Visual Studio. So what we want to do is we want to go into Pages, and we will right-click, Add a Razor component, and we'll call it To Do. So now you can see we have a new Razor component right here called To Do, and just as we did before, we're going to add some pieces to it. So let's see if we can fit everything on the screen. So we need to add our page code to the very top. So this is how our application knows to route all of the URL requests for /todo to this page. We have our title, which is a heading 3, and it's going to say to do. And we go down a little bit, and we're going to press save. And the next thing we need to do is we need to open up our menu. So our menu is inside Shared and Nav menu. And if I move this around, we can see that we have our elements right here. Doing it in Visual Studio versus Notepad, it's a little bit easier. You can see the color coding of the text, but basically what we want to do is add a fourth item. Now, all we have to do is copy this, paste it right here, and now we have our fourth item, which will tell the web browser to navigate to To Do, and the menu item will say To Do. So now in the instructions, it says to use .NET Run to open it up. Well, we don't need to use that command, we can just press play. So once we do that, we can see the page that we're accustomed to. We can see our counter that we can count. We see our data source, and we see To Do as a blank page, just as we did in the previous tutorial. Now I can press the stop button over here. And following with the instructions, we need to add a to-do item.cs, and it wants us to add that in the root. So we're going to right click here going to add, in this case it's a class, and we want to add to do item. Oops. Do item, just like that. And we press add. And we can see that we have our file right here, todoitem.cs. Todoitem.cs is what it was asking us to create. And it's created the structure for us here. All we need is our class. So right here, add our class like this. And that's it. And we can save this and we can close it. Now what we need to do is we need to return to the Blazor file for our to-do, and we have to add our list so that we can see things happening. So we'll add our unordered list with a list item of the title. And we need to add our code so that we have our list of to-do item. So our code says for each to-do in to-dos. Well, to-dos is a list of to-do item, which is the class that we just added right here. So now what we need to do is we need to add our text box to let us add a new entry. And we can put it right here. And we need to have a button that's going to allow us to press add. Now, just as we did the last time, we can run our program at this point. And if we view the to-do page, we should be able to see that we have a box to type in and we have a button to press, but of course we haven't hooked up the button to tell it to do anything yet. So what we need to do, just like last time, we need to create the onClick event. We need to add it to our button. And we also have to add our method, which is add to do. Now, in addition to that, we need to create a private variable that we're going to use to capture what the user is typing. And what we're going to do is we're going to bind that variable to the text box where the user can type the new to-do item. So right here on the input box or the text box, we'll use bind new to-do, and that's the name of our private string variable here. And then down below, we'll just add some logic to our add to do method. So if this new to do string is not null or white space, then what we'd like to do is use our list of to-dos and add a new to-do item that has the property title equals and the string that the person typed into the box. And as soon as we do that, we want to return that string back to empty so that the box clears, and then we can continue on with creating a new entry. So now we can go and we can run our program again. So we press on to do, and we can type item 1, add to do. And we can see that we get item 1, item 2, press, and we get item 2. Now, as discussed in the previous tutorials, the list doesn't persist. We don't have any code for saving, but we've created the framework to be able to add new items and bind data to different visual elements. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, what we can do is we can expand on the way the page operates. So if we look right here, we have for each to-do in to-dos. And right now, all we're doing is creating a new list item with the text of the title. But instead, if we replace that with this, we'll now end up with a checkbox that's bound to the parameter, or that is now bound to the property of is done of the current to-do item. So it'll affect whether or not the item is checked or not. And then we have a text box that's bound to the title, so we can modify the title. And in addition to that, what we can do is we can modify our title at the top to include how many items are not done. We can press play. Now pressing play is the same as running the .NET run command if you were doing this using the command line. So now we can go to the to-do, we can type item 1, type item 2, and notice that we have 2 items that aren't checked. Item 3 items aren't checked, and if I check the boxes, these numbers go down. Now, if you notice that all of these are on the same line, there's something wrong here. So if I close this, I'll stop the program, I'll go back, and I made a mistake when I copied and pasted this. Notice here that I have an unordered list, the start and the stop of it, the opening and closing tags, but here I forgot to put the list item. So we'll just paste that here. There. So now we have this component as well. So that'll tell us how to display each item independently as a single item in the list. So now if we go over to to-do, we type item 1, item 2, item 3, there, and now we can say done, 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 or not done, and so on. And that takes us through the entire tutorial for the basic Blazor to-do app. It's not persisting, it's not saving, but it's letting us create a basic UI, it's letting us bind data to it, using variables, collecting information, displaying it on the screen, doing a little bit of logic, running methods, a whole bunch of stuff like that. So now we can move on to some more complicated things, but as you can see, when you go through some of the tutorials on the Microsoft site, they may do it using the command line, or they might use Visual Studio Code, but ultimately the command line and other tools, they're doing it the same way as we would in Visual Studio, but the method that you use to get there is slightly different. For the most part, we're going to use Visual Studio for everything. Also keep in mind that there is a difference between what Microsoft will call Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code. Those are 2 different programs. We are using Visual Studio, and all of the things that you can do inside Visual Studio Code, as well as in the command line, you can do in Visual Studio, but the process is slightly different.